We are spending their money. We're exhausting the planet we will leave them. Their aspirations, their work ethic, and motivation never seem to be good enough for us. I am a baby boomer, and we are the best thing ever. Or so we thought. Millennials are calling us out. But wait a minute, they ain't so perfect either. No two generations have ever seemed so adversarial. Battle of the Ages, boomers versus millennials, right now on Try to Keep Up. Where do you go to talk about generations? You go where it all begins, in a hospital birthing room. Toronto's Sunnybrook Hospital's birthing unit delivers about 4,000 babies every year and are already working on the next generation. My friend Winston C. is one of those millennials. He was born the same year as the World Wide Web. I was born the same year as the computer mouse, which, by the way, began life as a wooden block. Can't we just get along?
How comfortable do you feel in a birthing room?
The last time I've been in one of these rooms is, 25 years ago. So I had a lot of questions when we first walked in here.
Not by choice.
Not by choice.
This is where the next generation is going to, of course, be starting, and the next generation after that, and after that. First of all, generation. Who decides where a generation starts, when it finishes, what the name is?
It's such an arbitrary thing. You Google and you kind of try to define what a millennial is and where the generation breakdowns are, and you kind of realize that everybody has their own definition of where a millennial lies. Is it 1980? Is it 1982? Everybody has a different view on that.
You are a millennial.
Am I?
I am a baby boomer. And the reason we're getting together on this, other than the fact we are friends, is that there perhaps have been no other two generations, I think, that have resented each other as much.
Resented each other, but also have so many similarities as two different generations. And there's kind of a generation in between as well. But, we don't pit those generations together. It's always baby boomers versus the millennial.
I guess it's because the millennials are our kids. And we're just not getting along. So what we're going to do is, first of all, a primer on the generations. All right. So generally a generation is between 20 to 25 years, sometimes more, sometimes less. I got this from thoughtco.com. Here's your generations. 1900 to 1924, born in those years, you're the GI generation, or what's called the greatest generation. GI referring to military, army, and that.
Right.
The two world wars. Traditionalists, or the silent generation, are born between 1925 to 1945. Then we have the dreaded baby boomers, of which I am one, but I'm on the tail end of it. The first year, 1946 to 1964 for baby boomers. Then we had that in-between generation that you spoke of, Generation X, which actually was named by a Canadian author, Douglas Coupland. His book, Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture, is where that name came from. Then, 1980s to the late 90s, Generation Y is what you were first called, and then the millennials name, the label, was put on you.
And the M word, millennials, it has almost kind of different meanings to different people, but when I see baby boomers, I see the use of millennials with a very negative connotation. And I often kind of wonder where that comes from, where all this resentment and almost anger comes from sometimes. Is there a way for us to find mutual understanding so that we kind of can move forward together and kind of see the world get into a better place? Because millennials often put a lot of blame on the baby boomers, and it's the same vice versa.
It is. And I think in some cases the blame is rightly placed. In other cases, it's not. So you have baby boomers who are sort of looking at millennials for not pulling their weight, and you have millennials looking at baby boomers for having destroyed their earth, their world.
Do you see millennials like myself as lazy?
No, I do not. I don't, because I have kids who are millennials, and I don't see them as lazy. I have heard other people, and when I talk on social media and you mention millennials, I will get a pushback, though, from people saying, oh, they're lazy. They just want the world handed to them.
Yeah, and often when I have conversations with millennial peers, we kind of look back at the state of the economy, kind of where the recession was, and you kind of see that as a byproduct of kind of the economy that was created by baby boomers. It grew to such a point that it almost imploded on itself, and we've kind of had to fix a lot of it, or so we think.
What's funny is Generation X and Generation Y, or the millennials, are quite often referred to as the me generation, the selfish generation. I think you could pretty well apply that to baby boomers, because the problems with the economy mainly stem from people trying to get rich quick. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, through all sorts of finagling. So I could almost see the me generation being used to title the baby boomers.
Yeah, it's a very narrow kind of mindset, if you will. Try to get successful, try to get rich real quick, but you don't really look at the future ramifications onto the next generation. And that's kind of what we've been left dealing with, is try to figure out where we go from here. And, you kind of look at what millennials are doing with, with the modernization of apps like Uber, of all this technology that is, quote, disrupting. It's us kind of taking what has been left behind and trying to evolve it into the next big thing.
All right. I got this from an article called The Real Reason Baby Boomers and Millennials Don't See Eye to Eye, written by Nicholas Cole, who himself admits to being a millennial. This comes from Inc.com, which is a small business and startups website. So baby boomers, according to him, claim millennials aren't hardworking enough. Millennials claim baby boomers didn't do a good enough job balancing work and enjoying life, enjoying the journey.
Interesting.
Baby boomers accuse millennials of being impatient and naive for wanting to find a job they can work while traveling with their laptop. But in contrast, millennials remind parents of their own unhappiness climbing a meaningless corporate ladder. Isn't that the truth?
It's really representative, and you kind of look at a pendulum swinging. It goes one way where you want that home with the white picket fence. You want that picture perfect corporate job on your resume.
Is that what millennials still want? The home with a perfect white picket fence?
That's it. That vision of what people wanted in that baby boomer generation isn't what millennials want. So when you kind of look at this article and everybody's pointing fingers at each other, it's not what the other generation wants. So we don't want that picket fence with the house with the picket fence. We don't want that corporate job.
What do you want?
We want to be able to be transient, and we want to be able to travel and live experiences and be able to make decisions for ourselves. We're afraid of commitment.
But you can't pay. How are you going to pay for all that?
It's true. You're going to have to find ways to work, and it's a very real struggle. It's actually it's something that I'm personally figuring out myself, having walked away from a pretty corporate job and now trying to navigate my own way as a freelancer.
This is interesting, because as a baby boomer, you worked 50 or so weeks out of the year, and then you got 2 weeks in which you went somewhere and spent the money that you worked for so you could get away.
Three weeks if you're lucky.
Yeah, that's right. But now it's like millennials do seem to want to enjoy the journey more, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I can't blame them. It's a lifestyle that I for sure want myself. I think the one thing that we all can learn from this, whether you're a baby boomer, whether you're a millennial, is you kind of have to put aside the differences and try to understand where we're coming from. As millennials, we look back at what baby boomers have done, and we're trying to do things in a way that makes us happy. You see how some people get stuck in jobs for so many years, and you build a great career at a company, but you might not necessarily be happy, per this article. And if you're not happy and you're stepping away from retirement and then you're living your life post-retirement, you're not giving yourself a lot of time. So if you can optimize that, do what you want to do, still find a way to make a decent living and be happy at the same time, can you blame millennials for doing that?
Before we leave this article, let's give you a couple of quotes from it. Neither side is doing a very good job working to understand where the other is coming from. So while we're complaining about the other person, we're not realizing maybe we need to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, have these types of conversations that we're having and try to understand why we made the decisions that we have and why we are continuing to make certain decisions the way they are today.
The only way both can understand each other is another quote. The only way both can understand each other is if the perspective is pulled back and both sides can be acknowledged at the same time. So you want to be acknowledged. You want to be validated.
Agreed.
Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is what inventions and creations came under the baby boomers watch and what came under the millennials watch. It was really with baby boomers that knowledge in the world started snowballing and inventions were coming fast and furious. So let's talk about baby boomers first of all. And there are many more, and these are in no particular order. The artificial heart came during the baby boomer watch. DNA fingerprinting, the computer age, space travel, the TV and phone explosion. So that means that phones were used for more than just talking back and forth with people. Same thing with televisions. Hedge funds.
Hedge funds.
Don't even ask me.
And you look at investments, just to speak to that point specifically. Nowadays, there are so many new modern takes of things like hedge funds and mutual funds and bonds and investments, where people are using robo-advisors, where you're actually trusting a computer software to make investment decisions for you and to optimize it. So in a lot of ways, it's a lot of what you had, but millennials have just kind of refined it.
Now, I want to finish my list of 10 for baby boomers. The transistor and the microchip, which of course led to an explosion in electronics and towards the computer. VCRs, which led to TV on demand. It was something that was the precursor to streaming. And then audio cassettes, 8 tracks, and CDs. And again, don't say what's that. But again, it came to on-demand listening. It was I want to listen to this song by this person right now in this place. So now, millennial inventions. In fact, the internet, the World Wide Web, came online and was available to the public the year you were born.
1993.
So you have never known a world without internet.
No. And I do remember days where
1993?
I do not remember 1993, no. But I remember days where we would have to dial up to internet and you would have AOL, you've got mail. But those days, or the days where you would not be able to use the telephone because you were on the internet. So you actually had to pick one or the other. But I don't remember a day without having some level of internet access.
I've chosen Nintendo as another biggie that came out of the millennial watch. It led to an incredible explosion in gaming. Email, cell phones, laptops, Google, social media, Wi-Fi, all game changers. You talked about this about Uber earlier. So the P2Ps, the peer-to-peers, the networks, and the apps. So we're talking about social media. And we're talking about Uber and about Skip the Dishes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then streaming media, which is what my YouTube channel is.
Changing everything. It's changing the landscape of media. It's making television executives question where the industry is going and what to do with this industry. When you kind of look at these and you kind of silo them out to this generation did ABC and the millennial generation did XYZ, you kind of silo it off. But to me, and what's important in this kind of a conversation is trying to make a connection between these two. Yes, they're different, but I see them as kind of connected in some way as well. We talked about the robo-advisors. That came from early days of investments back then. A lot of baby boomers and a lot of, I'm going to say, quote, older generation pioneered a lot of the infrastructure and pioneered the desire for this economy. And millennials have taken a lot of what's been left there and have refined it using technology. And that piece of technology is ultimately what is propelling this generation into the next generation. And it's interesting to see where things are going now.
I think it's fascinating what you said near to the beginning of this, and that is the similarities are probably the reason that we clash, that we don't get along. I think in one way, both our generations are pioneers of incredible and quick change.
I mean, I think about the technology of just inside this room that we're in, the technology embedded. A lot of it is inventions and refinements from millennials, but the infrastructure of this comes all the way from the 70s. And, this is a good representation of multiple generations working together to propel the world forward. And if we spent a little less time picking apart differences from each other and a little more time understanding each other, I think we could find common ground to really find a better future for everybody.
And what is really going to tell a tale is that millennials now, their children, are creating yet another generation. And so far, this generation has yet to get one of those catchy titles like millennials or baby boomers. So we're talking about Generation Alpha.
So that's what we call them now.
Those are the children of millennials. So we're in past the 2010s, and now we're into 2020. So now we have a generation that is being born, and they're going to be called, so far, Generation Alpha, which comes after Generation Z or Z. So are we starting all over again? And what kind of generation? Are the millennials in Generation Alpha going to be as adversarial as baby boomers and millennials?
Yeah, and maybe they'll find more understanding with baby boomers. Who knows? Because as I had mentioned before, the pendulum swings, and a lot of my generation, the millennials, the M words, we prided ourselves in being connected. So we were the ones who really embraced the Facebook platform, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram. But while a lot of Gen Alpha, for example, are still using these social networks, there's also a bit of a sense of revolution and revolt against using some of these. And we're finding some people not actually not embracing this technology because they're trying to kind of put aside and cut away from the noise that us as millennials have created.
We remember as baby boomers, there was definitely a pushback from our parents about rock and roll and the way our hair was, or anything anti-Vietnam. But the difference being is we were almost polar opposites from our parents. We didn't listen to the same music. We didn't appreciate the same movies, same shows. Whereas now, when you have millennials and baby boomers, in a lot of cases, I'm listening to the same music my kids are. Mm-hmm. They're actually watching some old shows that used to be in my generation, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
People are going back. There are TV channels now that are just retro shows, and retro to us would have been what you were watching.
And millennials are eating
It's
up.
cool. We think it's cool, and you guys are listening to our music.
And that backs up what you're saying about us being so similar. And maybe that is why there is such a clash.
Yeah, the idea of too many cooks in the kitchen trying to push something, trying to steer something, and you kind of see that same mindset in a lot of corporate cultures nowadays, where you have kind of this traditional mindset, people, the baby boomers running big organizations, and then you bring in the millennials who are trying to bring in a different idea, but there's also a sense of disconnect there where we're not fully understanding each other. So maybe as organizations, we can find better ways forward if we make an effort to understand each other. So that's on both sides. If baby boomers spend time understanding millennials and what they try to see things and how they see things, and the other way around.
So I'm going back to that quote. The only way both can understand each other is if the perspective is pulled back and both sides can be acknowledged at the same time. Thank you, Winston.
Thank you.
We are an aging population in a world where rapid change is challenging not only our physical health, but our mental health well-being as well. Pharmaceuticals were the miracle cure-all for the 20th century. However, we are learning that sometimes that cure is worse than the disease. In the future, if you want to be healthy, you better be able to pay for it. What should you be doing? What pills and supplements should you take? Code Blue, a staying alive survival guide. Next, try to keep up. Try to keep up with the Kevin Frankish channel. Leave a comment, subscribe, and click on notifications. Thank you for watching.